Can selling your land, your shares, or any other property trigger presumptive tax exposure under the presumptive tax regime? This is the question I got from someone after posting last week's video on operations of the presumptive tax regime. If you have not watched the video, you can go back now and watch it so that you will understand what we are talking about. So as a small business owner who is subject to the presumptive tax regime in Nigeria, if you sell a land that was probably bequeathed to you, or an inheritance, or you sell a property, or you even have some shares, can that trigger any capital gains exposure under the presumptive tax regime? That is what we are going to be considering today. And as you know, Oladejo Adeyemi is my name. I am your formal business coach who designates his time to reading the tax laws so that you do not have to spend as much time doing the same. I explained presumptive tax regime, the constituent of it, fully under the video I posted last week. And like I said, you may want to go watch that video for full understanding of how the presumptive tax regime operates. But the question for determination today is, can selling your land, your shares, or property trigger additional exposure under the presumptive tax regime? Clearly, capital gains used to be boxed under the capital gains tax for all categories of taxpayers before the advent of this new tax law. But with this new tax law, then comes the issue of capital gains. But Section 29 of the Nigeria Tax Act then preempts that if you don't have record, the presumptive tax regime would apply to you. It is important to note that the answer to this question is clearly provided in the regulation, Presumptive Tax Regulation, which was signed by the former Minister of Finance sometimes in March this year. Regulation 7 of that regulation provides verbatim that where transaction gives rise to a chargeable gain accruing to an individual under the Nigeria Tax Act 2025, the individual shall, not later than 30 days of the date the transaction is concluded or the date the consideration is received, whichever is earlier, remit presumptive capital gains tax at the rate of 2% of the consideration for the transaction. It is important to also note that sub-regulation 2 of that regulation 7 says that transactions to which regulation 1 applies include, without limitation, disposal resulting in chargeable gains from land, building, movable assets, shares, or intangible property, unless specifically exempted from capital gains tax under the Nigeria Tax Act 2025. So, this follower that asked me this question, I hope I've been able to answer your question clearly, not just from what I think, but from what the provisions of the enabling law, by reason of the regulation that has been specifically carved out for this, provides for. Capital gains, presumptive capital gains tax exists, and this, the law says, the regulation says, it is at 2% of the consideration received for that particular transaction. And the sub-regulation 2 of that regulation 7 says it covers gains from land, from buildings, from movable assets, from shares or intangible properties, unless such gains are specifically exempt from such tax. I hope this helps you in particular and helps every other small business owner in general. The fact that the presumptive tax regime applies to you does not mean you do not have capital gains requirements. And this is an interesting one because you don't want to be compliant to the provision of the law on the basis of income tax, but you have significant exposure from your transactions relating to capital gains. So if you didn't know that before now, because you are following this channel, you now know that there is such thing as presumptive capital gains tax, and it applies at 2% of the consideration received from that transaction, and you should declare that within 30 days from the date that the transaction is concluded or the consideration is received, whichever is earlier. I'm definitely going to come your way again, but before you see me again, keep sharing, keep liking, keep subscribing. This is the only way I consider that we can continue to educate our growing business community such that we know what the law requires of us. Bye for now.